Every week I teach a Parsha class, and I try to find something that I've never done before, which is different and weird and off the beaten path. What I want to do tonight is the names of the three wives of Esau. That's my topic. Okay, the names of Esau married three women. According to some of Farshim, he married 4. According to some of Farshim, he married 5. But he certainly had 3 wives. In Parshas Toldos, the names of his 3 wives are mentioned, and then again in our Parsha, in Parshas Vayishlach, the names of the wives of Esau are repeated again. And this is what I decided to do. It's an unusual topic, and I have to be honest. I looked in the Midrashim, I looked in the various Mefarshim. There's very, very little material on this, which means that when the Mefarshim have less to say, I have to create more. Call it what you wish. Drush, which is either credible or not credible. It's just an interesting idea to explore the story of the wives of Esau. The first thing is, Esau was an animal. I don't tell you, Esau was a Rasha. Right, a Rasha Merusha. Now there's different kinds of Rishayim, right? Yishmael is also a Rasha. But Yishmael's Rishis expressed itself mostly in being about taiva. He just liked to have pleasure. What's called in Lashon Chassidus chesed of klipa. Esau had bloodlust. Esau was a redhead. He was a passionate person. And he got pleasure from Midas HaGvura, right? The least of Midas HaGvura, if you know such people, some people get pleasure from finding fault in other people, from criticizing people. That's a teva. It's a Midas HaGvura. It says in Chassidus that a person who has a nature to criticize other people starts at criticizing other people because he believes in a cause. Then he criticizes people because of the fun of criticizing people. And it trickles down from criticizing people for righteous reasons to enjoying, seeing other people suffer. Esau is the bottom of the heap. He was a midah rov gvura. He's a bad man. So Rashi says that for 40 years he did terrible things. And at 40, mitabol, he became a tzaddik, he got married. Why did he get married at 40? His father got married at 40. The fact that what he did until 40 was not at all the same as what Yitzchak did until 40, that detail he forgot. But otherwise, he got married the same age as his father. His father got married at 40, he got married at 40. Of course, his father married a girl who was not from Bnei Chom. His father sent a shliach far away to find a wife from Bnei Shem. And he married 2 Chitiyos, women from Etzisol, 2 Knaaniyos. But he was the same, Rashi says, Chumash says he was the same age as his father when he got married. Now, this is when he was 40. 23 years later, Yaakov Avinu turned 63 and he leaves home. When Yaakov Avinu leaves home, Yitzchak calls him. So of course, Rivka tells Yaakov Avinu to leave because she knows that Esau wants to kill her. Misnacham alecha largecha. So Rivka says, Lama eshkel gshtechem gam shnechem yemechet, go away a few days, yamim achadim, your brother will come down, he won't hate you so much, and then I'll send a shliach to call you back. And Yaakov Avinu leaves. That exodus ended up being 36 years before Rivka finally sends the shliach that the Esau is no, the yamim achadim, the few days till your brother's wrath passes, turns out to be 36 years, because 14 years he was learning in yeshiva of Eiver, and then 20 years he lived in Lavan's house, for 2 years he traveled back, 14 and 20 and 2 is 36 years from the time Rivka sends him away when he's 63 until he comes back, he's 99 years old, he's 36 years old. But when Rivka wants Yaakov to leave, so Esau should murder him, she needs to come to Yitzchak with a front, right? She doesn't want to tell Yitzchak the truth. She doesn't want to tell Yitzchak that her two sons are killing each other. So she comes up with what you would call a white lie, a diplomatic way of getting Yitzchak to agree with her that Yaakov should leave without Yitzchak finding out the reason. She says to Yaakov, Yitzchak Avinu, our son Esau had these two girls that he married. They've been living in a house for 23 years. According to one opinion in Rashi, they made Yitzchak blind. They made Yitzchak blind because of the Ocean of Avodah Zarah. And Rivka says, Katzti mibnei ches ka'ela mibnei sa'aretz. They're despicable. They're lowly people. And I don't want Yaakov to marry a local woman, a Hittite. So Yitzchak also called Yaakov Avinu. Rivka tells Yaakov Avinu, leave, your brother shouldn't kill you. Yitzchak called Yaakov Avinu and says, go away to Charan. Don't marry a Canaanite. Go to our family. Your mother has a brother. His name is Lavan. And you'll take a wife from there. So Yaakov leaves. So Esau becomes very religious again. Now he's 63 years old. And his father is not happy with the fact that he married two women from Canaan. So he doesn't divorce his two first wives and marry a third wife. He adds another wife. And Rashi says, he adds a third wife. He marries Yishmael's daughter, whose name is Basmas or Mochlas. I'm going to get to this momentarily. So Esau marries two women when he's 40. He marries a third wife when he's 63. The reason he marries a third time is because Yitzchak's not happy with the fact that he married Canaanites, but he does not divorce his first two wives. He adds a third wife, who's the daughter of Yishmael. Rashi adds, very importantly, that Yishmael died at that time. A lot of the math has to do with Yishmael's dying. Yishmael died at that time, which is why this third wife that Esau married, his name is Basmas or Machlas, is not married to Esau by her father. She's married to Esau by her oldest brother, whose name is Nevoyes, Achei Nevoyes. So Esau has, according to the Chumash and Rashi, Esau has three wives. Here's the deal, each one of these three wives has two names, okay? In Parshas Toldos, the first wife is called Yehudis Bas Be'eri. In our Pasha, Yehudis Bas Be'eri is called Oholivoma Bas Tzivyon Bas Ana Bas Tzivyon. She has two fathers. Bas Ana Bas Tzivyon. Her first name is no longer Yehudis, it's Oholivoma, and her father is Bas Ana Bas Tzivyon. The second wife that Esau marries is called in Parshas Toldos Bosmas Bas Eloi, and in our Pasha, in Parshas Vayishlach, she's called Oda Bas Eloi. At least her father has the same name. The third wife is called in Parshas Toldos Mochalas Bas Yishmael, Achei Nevoyes, and in our Pasha she's called Basmas Bas Yishmael, Achei Nevoyes. So Esau has three wives and together a total of 6 names and 4 shveds, 4 father-in-law's names. So Rashi says it's only 3 women. Yehudis Bas Be'eri is the same woman as Olivama Bas Ana Bas Tzivyon. Oda Basmas Bas Eloi is the same as Oda Bas Eloi. And of course, Machlas Bas Yishmael is the same as Basmas Bas Yishmael. The Even Ezra says that what happened was Esau actually married 4 times, not 3 times, 4 times. That his wife Yehudis Bas Be'eri died childless, and he took another wife whose name was Olivama Bas Ana Bas Tzivyon. It's another woman. So according to the Even Ezra, Yehudis and Olivama are 2 different people. Other Mefarshim say that Rashbam says, I think, that he had 5 wives. And the Psukim had to be taken literally. He married 2 women. One was Yehudis Bas Be'eri, the other one was Basmas Bas Eloi. These 2 women worshipped idols. They made Yitzchak Avinu upset. They blinded Yitzchak upset. So they both died childless from a kpeda from Yitzchak and Rivka. This was I think the Rashbam says it. The Ramban says it. So all he was left with was the third wife from Parshas Toldos, which is Machlas or Basmas Bas Yishmael. And then he married 2 more women. One was called Oda Bas Eloi, so the girl's name is different, but the father's name is the same. They may have been sisters. And the other one was Oholivama Bas Ana Bas Tzivyon. So Esau either has 3 wives, 4 wives, or 5 wives, depending who you add. Bottom line is it's a mess, okay? Another thing that we talk about in Rashi in our Parshas Vayishlach, again, I want to clarify this. The end of Parshas Vayishlach is a long discussion on the genealogy of Esau. You may remember that at the end of Pashas Chayesara, there was a few psukim that talked about Yishmael's children. Our Pasha, Yishlach, which is a pretty long Pasha, Shishi and Shvi, is dedicated almost entirely to the genealogy of Esau. It talks about Esau's immediate family, his 3 wives, his 6 or 7 sons, I forgot how many he had, and their grandchildren. And then you talk about the fact that Esau intermarried with royalty. Esau's children married Bnei Seir, which is basically Italy, Rome. So originally Esau lived in a place called Edom, which is southeast of Eretz Yisrael. If you ever look on an atlas of the ancient world, he lived southeast of Eretz Yisrael. And at some point his descendants, I don't know exactly when, moved from the southeast of Eretz Yisrael to what is now Italy and Rome. One of the many descendants of Esau is a guy named Aluf Magdiel, and Rashi says Zu Roimi. This goes on Rome. And according to this opinion in Rashi, our Parsha, at the end of Parsha of Vayishlach, is not only talking about the offsprings of Esau that were born and lived in those few years, it actually gives you the entire history of the genealogy of Esau, basically until Mashiach. So you have a very long conversation. It goes on for many psukim, talking about Esau's descendants, the descendants of Seir and their kings, basically till Mashiach. There's some controversy in the Machon. I spoke about this last year. I gave you a whole class on it. If anybody's desperate to listen to it, you can visit Inside Chassidus.org and find my Pashas class on Vayishlach. It's there. You can listen to it. But what I want to talk to tonight is just the names of the wives of Esau. Push up their names. So the first thing that I want to say before I get to them specifically is there was tons of mamzeris. There was a terrible lack of tznius. They were animals. Mamish, like what the Judaism says about avodim. They had no count of the yichus whatsoever. And one of the features of illegitimacy, one of the features of children who are born without tznius, is that they have no modesty. They're very chutzpahdik. They're very disrespectful. When we hold, Torah teaches us that people who behave tzniusdik, their children have certain characteristics that are considered refined. And one of them is shame. Mamzerim, children who are illegitimate, are very chutzpahdik. They're very forward and aggressive and unrefined and immodest. Now, of course, in America, those are all wonderful attributes that make you a successful person. But Nebuch, our Torah still holds that modesty and shame are actually good attributes. And Mamzerim lack that tendency. They have a tendency towards being more chutzpahdik. And of course, the consummate chutzpahdik, the chutzpahdik of all chutzpahdiks, is a fellow named Amalek. Amalek, who's our enemy forever, who we're supposed to wipe off the face of this earth in every opportunity we get. Amalek is our cousin. Amalek is the son of Eliphaz ben Esau. And what's weird about it is, Eliphaz was actually a pretty good guy. According to some opinions, I mentioned this the other day, Eliphaz was a Navi. There are opinions that hold that Eliphaz is one of the 5 personalities in the Sefer Eve, the book of Job, which was written by Moshe Rabbeinu, as I told you the other day. And Eliphaz also behaved immorally, and he brought a mamzer into the world. And I guess you could say that because Eliphaz was himself holding on a higher madrega, when a person on a higher madrega falls into such a yonim of harayas, so Amalek represents the ultimate chutzpahnik. It's called chutzpah b'li taga. Chutzpah b'chlal means I'm aggressive, I'm disrespectful, without regard for who you are. But you have to have some kind of an excuse. If you're a chutzpahnik, you have to have a leg to stand on. What's the basis for your chutzpah? Amalek needs no excuses. Amalek comes to the most beautiful person, most righteous person. He just can't stand order. He can't stand that people are living menschlich. Amalek represents chutzpah. And it seems to be a trait which is consistent in Esau's family, at least according to Rashi, that there's onashem amdedes. Wherever you look, there's illegitimacy. I want you to note that Ramban, Kedakei Ba'Kodesh, argued with Rashi at every turn. Rashi holds that whenever you have the names of the children of Esau the same, that it means that it's the same person. And over here you call him the son of so-and-so, and here you call him the son of so-and-so, the tendency is he's a mamzer, The Ramban says not necessarily, there may be 2 people with the same name. So the Ramban seems to out-pshat Rashi in pshat, but certainly Rashi is of the opinion that there was an enormous amount of mamzeris in Esau's family, and again, a symptom of that is chutzpah. And tznius breeds children that have a tznius, that have a modesty, shame. Now, let's talk about the names of the wives of Esau, but I'm not going to continue this whole game of do they have 3 wives, 4 wives, or 5 wives? Okay, again, Rashi holds he had 3 wives. Even Eliezer said he had 4, that Yehudis never had any children. And Alivama Bas Anna Bas Sivin is another woman. The Rashbam, I think, so the Ramban says he had 5 wives, because the 2 wives that he married first died without children, because Yitzchak and Rivka were makbid for their Avodah Zarah, and he married 2 other women, Ada Bas Eilein and Alivama Bas Anna Bas Sivin. So, but I'm not doing that. I'm just going to go back to Rashi's basic presumption that Esau has 3 wives. Each one of them has 2 names, okay? And we're going to study these in light of their character. I'm translating their names to the best of my ability. Some of this says in Midrashim. A lot of this I'm concocting. A lot of this I'm making up because there's very, very little in the Mefarshim, and God has to forgive me for my permission that I've given myself to interpret words. But like I said, some of it is found in the Mefarshim. Let's start with Yehudis. The first wife of Esau's name is Yehudis. In our Pasha, her name changes. She's no longer called Yehudis, she's called Ahalivama. Now, Yehudis is an interesting name to give a Bishas, because Yehudis is a very beautiful name. Right? In our history, Yehudis is a name that's denoted for women who were big, by the Madrega, big tzidkanias, were called Yehudis. And in the Megillas Esther, the Jewish people are called Yehudim, right? And of course, you know that the Jewish people are not called Yehudim because they're from Shevet Yehuda, because the most prominent of the Yehudim is a man named Ish Yehudi, Mordechai HaTzadik, and Mordechai was not from Shevet Yehuda at all, he was from Shevet Binyamin. You're going to have to stop talking or I'll stop talking. In fact, you can turn around and face me. Legamre. 180 degrees. The Gemara says that Yidden took the title Yehudi to mean Achei Temimim. Jewish people's traditional name was Ivri, Hebrew, Yevrei in Russian. The name Jew first appears in the Megillas Esther. The reason the Jewish people changed their name from Ivri, which means basically a foreign, to the name Yehudi, was because Ivrim became assimilated. The Golos Bavel is a very interesting and disturbing story. And it's good to know the story, but when Jews came to Bavel, they were put right into high society. They were not treated like common slaves. They were considered super intelligent, and the Babylonians used the Jewish people not as slaves, but pushed as computers. They're very well respected. And Golos Bavel, therefore, resulted in a lot of assimilation. The Goyim respected the Yidden, and Yidden began to marry Goyim, Shikses. And you read the Sefer Ezra, how he was trying to separate the Mamzerim and all the Esau, the big challenge, the confusion of genealogical situation amongst Jews. It was a disaster. So from Yidden wanted to hold on to their vows, their traditions, took a new name. They took the name Yehudi for the express reason of separating themselves from the classic Jew who was called an Ivri, a Hebrew. And the Gemara says the word Yehudi means HaKoifer b'Avodah Zarah, one who denies idol worship. And in a different place, the Gemara says, could you stop at the sandwich kiss? It's really rubbing me wrong. Stop at the sesame seeds. It's getting under my skin. Please. If you're a person who denies idol worship, that means automatically that you accept the whole Torah. So the word Yehudi means one who denies Avodah Zarah and one who submits to the whole Torah. Esau's first wife's name is Yehudis. So she arguably chose a very, very pious and righteous name. And Rashi already says that it was a front. Her name was actually Alivama. She took the name Yehudis to make herself righteous in the eyes of her Shved and Shvigir, her father-in-law and mother-in-law. So she wanted to give the impression that she's Kaif B'Avodah Zarah, so she took the name Yehudis. But alternatively, you could say that she took the name Yehudis so Yitzchak and Rivka should think that she's denying Avodah Zarah. But in fact, what she meant is that her relationship with Avodah Zarah was irrational. In other words, a person worships idols. They should have a reason, right? If you do something stupid, if you do something reasonable, you don't need a reason. It's reasonable. If it's something right, you don't need a reason. But if you're doing something wrong, or you're doing something bad, you have to have an excuse. She was Yehudis. She did bad things for no particular reason. In other words, you can flip the Yehudis the other way, that her hoida'ah, her submission in the ways of idolatry and all that represented, was done without even her enjoying it. She was just a troublemaker. In other words, Yehudis, which means to submit, could mean submission to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it could also mean submission to Avodah Zarah. So this was a girl, a woman, whose dedication to what was wrong didn't need an explanation. Her name is Yehudis. Alternatively, her name is Aholivama, and there's more than one translation of Aholivama. One of them has to do with Gilead, and the other one is Aholei Bama Beis Mem Hey. Aholei means the tent, Bama means a platform, a mizbeach. The tradition is, right, that a carbon is brought on a mizbeach. Alternatively, we don't bring on mizbeach, you bring on a Bama. Bama essentially is a platform, an elevated spot where you offer sacrifice. But the word Bama denotes a mizbeach, either a mizbeach that's secondary or a mizbeach that's wrong. One of the ideas associated with a Bama is the idea of gaiva. So her second name, her name is Yehudis. Her second name is Aholivama, which means that she represents the idea of offering karbonis to Avodah Zarah, and specifically offering them on a Bama, which is a secondary kind of mizbeach. Or Bama alternatively has to do with an idea of gaiva. I mean, one day you guys that get married, Mitzvah Hashem, sooner than you're going to imagine it. And when you get married, you learn the Chas and the Maimed. And when you learn the Chas and the Maimed, you'll come across a Maimed Chazal. The Chazal say, it's a pasuk actually, Chidlu lachem min ha-neshama, min ha-adam asher neshama ba'apei, ki b'meh nechshavu. It's a pasuk. Chidlu lachem, stay away from a person. Min ha-adam, from a person, asher neshama ba'apei, that his neshama is only in his nose. Ki b'meh nechshavu, what worth does he have? So the Chazal say, the Gemara says, Al-tikra b'meh la-boma. Stay away from a person whose neshama is only in his nose. And it says, b'meh, Al-tikra b'meh la-boma. And in this case also, Bama means something which makes them separate from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The concept is, when you wake up in the morning, before you say Meida Ani, and before you do what you have to do, the neshama is only in your nose, your arms and your legs are still sleeping, and at that point, you're Bama. Which means to say, your identity represents separateness from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's her second name. So her first name is Yehudis, which superficially means that she's submitting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what Rashi says. I would like to say that her submission to Avodah Zarah was without reason. And her second name is Ali Bama. That means her identity represents separateness from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And her father's name is Be'eri, or Bas Ana Bas Sivin. The Bas Ana Bas Sivin I'm going to leave alone. Her father's name is Bas Be'eri. Yud is Bas Be'eri. What does Be'eri mean? Be'eri means a well, right? And the Yud is an extra letter that means my well, a personalized well. Well, what do we know about wells? We're talking about wells. Let's talk about wells. Yitzchak Avinu was a well digger. His son married a woman whose father's name was my well. There are two concepts into a well. Okay, one concept of well is you dig under the ground until you find what's called Mayim Chayim, living water, and it comes up from underneath the ground. That's called a Be'er Mayim Chayim, a well of living water, which is alternatively called a Mayan, a fountain, right? But then you can have a be'er, which is not a well at all. It's simply a reservoir. You dig a hole in the ground and wait for it to rain, or you bring the water from someplace else. The difference between a be'er ma'im chayim, a well of living water, and a reservoir is a well of living water keeps on coming up from underneath the ground, and it's called ma'im chayim, it's called living water, it's kosher for a mikveh, it's kosher for a zav, it's kosher for paraduma, it's kosher for every kind of tefillah. But if you have just a hole in the ground, a be'er, which is not connected to living water, it can very easily dry up. Over time it'll dry by itself. There's a pasuk in Tanakh which speaks about people seeking boirais nishborim. They're looking in other wells. Instead of looking in the Eibishter's well, which is a be'er ma'im chayim, they look at be'er ma'im chayim. And that's how I'm translating the word be'eri. The first wife of Esau's name is Yehudis, and her father's name is Be'eri, which means a well. But a well that's self-centered. In other words, not a well that's connected to something outside of himself, but a well which is connected only to himself. Meaning, physically, he dug wells, he dug reservoirs basically, he put the water from someplace else, and those kind of wells, even when the water is inside of them, they're not called Mayim Chayim, they're not called living water, they're called Be'eris Nishborim. So that's Esau's first wife. Her name is Yehudis, alternative name is Aholivama. Yehudis means, on the outside, that she wanted to fool Shver and Shvika to thinking that she denied Avodah Zarah. On the inside, that her dedication to Avodah Zarah was without reason. Her name is Aholivama, Aholei Bama, Beis Mem Hey, which means basically separateness from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And her father's name is Be'eri. He has connection to water, but the water is not living. That's the first wife, okay? The second wife of Esau, her name, at least her father has one, her father's name is the same in both places. Her father's name is Eloin. Her name in Pashas Teldes is Basmas, and her name in our Pasha is Odo. Now, does anybody remember, this is an unfair question, but if you really, really pay attention to Chumash, we've had a woman earlier in the Chumash whose name was Odo. Does anybody remember? That's right. That, what was his name? Tuval Kayin had two wives. Lemech had two wives. One was called Odo and one was called Tzila. Esau's second wife has two names. In one Pasha, in Pasha's told us she's called Basmas Bas Eloin. In our Pasha, she's called Odo Bas Eloin. Now, remember, I'm making this up. Okay, this part I'm for sure making up. What does Eloin mean? What does Eloin mean? Eloin, Aleph, Lamed, Vav, Nun. It could mean a tree with a line in it at the end, right? The Elon with an extra Vav. But I decided to go in a different direction.
Is it like field?
Very good. Eloin means a plain. Vayera Elav Avraham v'yeshev be'Eloinei Mamre. Eloinei Mamre. Her father's name is Eloin. Eloin means a flat surface. Something which is not distinguished. And there's a Rashi, which I looked up in Pashas Lech Lecha, and if anybody wants to look, I'll tell you what Rashi it is. I wrote it down some on my notes here. Where Rashi, Pashas Pasuk, Kapitel Yidal Pasuk Vav, where Rashi brings an opinion which a lot of Rishonim disagree with, but Rashi holds that there are many words in the Chumash that mean a plain, a flat land. Now, how do we understand the notion of a plain, of a flat land? On the one hand, you could say, well, it's not sticking out, it's not higher, it's not gaiva. Because Bama represents gaiva, right? But on the other hand, the meaning of a misha, a flat place, is that there's no mechitzis, there's no borders. A very interesting halacha is, you're allowed to daven in a field next to a tree. You're not allowed to daven in an open field that's considered too open. You need to have a little bit of a constraint. So we're going to go with the translation that the second wife of Esau's father-in-law, Eloin, that word denotes a sprawling continuum of space which has no mechitas, has no borders. Now, just an open area. So the connotation would be that in Kedusha, everything needs to be fenced in. In Kedusha, everything needs to have a border and a mechitza, which separates one space from another, creates a tznius, creates a demarcation, creates an identity, and so on and so forth. The second wife of Esau's father represents a notion of total openness, which is obviously not such a good midah. At least that's what has to work, right? If it's Esau's shred, he's got to be a bad guy. If he would be Avraham Avinu's cousin, we'd find a positive explanation for Eloin, but since it's the father of Esau, so Eloin we're going to translate as being an open, continuous place. Now, her two names are Basmas and Odo. The second wife of Esau, her name in Pashas tells us is Basmas. Rashi says Basmas means Besamim. And again, you could say that she offered up Besamim to Avodah Zarah. You could say that she tried to give the impression that she had very, very good midos, a very good character, like Besamim. In other words, just like Yehudis tried to give the impression that she's this righteous woman because she denied idol worship. So Basmas took a name which would denote refined character. She has such a refined character that she's like fine Besamim, but her actual identity was Odo, Aleph Daled Hey. Odo has more than one translation. One of the translations was that she was always dressing herself very beautiful. Odo could mean jewelry, and that her intentions of dressing up very pretty were for the opposite of the purposes of tznius. Another translation of Odo is that she was so miserable that even Esau didn't like her. Esau was a lowlife. He was a Balmidas Reis. And Rashi says in Bereshis that the two wives of Lemach, Odo and Tzila always lived with Lemach. He enjoyed her company. And Ada was muchram. He had no time and no patience for her. There's an interpretation that and some of the Mepharshim bring it here also, that Ada means, amongst other things, a woman who's so repulsive that even Esau, who was himself such a unrefined human being, couldn't enjoy her company. He was married to her. He didn't divorce her. Maybe it would have been too costly to divorce her or too dangerous to divorce her. But Esau married a girl who was so rotten in character that he pushed her away. She was his wife, but she couldn't live close to him. And that's how you understand the name of the second wife of Esau. The father's name is Eloin, which represents an openness without any constraint. Her first name is Basmas, which could either mean that she burned Basamim to Avodah Zarah, or she tried to fool her father-in-law into thinking that she has good character. Her second name is Ada, which means more than one thing. It means to bedeck herself, to bejewel herself, make herself pretty, not for purposes of tznius, or that she was such a repulsive woman that even Esau couldn't stand living with her. And then Esau marries a third wife. His third wife is his cousin. Right, Yishmael is his uncle. Yishmael is Yitzchak's brother. And this is Yishmael's daughter. They're first cousins. They have the same... the fathers are both Avraham Avinu's sons, right? Yitzchak is Avraham Avinu's son. Yishmael is Avraham Avinu's son. And these are two cousins getting married. And her name is also Basmas. And I would like to propose that her name was Basmas because Shitaka was a good girl. She was Yishmael's daughter. She was married off by Yishmael's oldest son, whose name was Nevoyes. Now Nevoyes, if you remember the class I gave you a couple of weeks ago, there's a lot of ways of translating the word Nevoyes. It's hard to find a source for this, by the way, but my preferred translation of Nevoyes is a guy who never stopped to talk. He was a yente, he just talked and talked and talked and talked, which means there wasn't a lot of substance, but he was very harmless. He was just a yente. And he marries her off. She's his sister, and the reason he marries her because Yishmael dies. So she didn't have the midas rois of the Benois Canaan. She wasn't evil. She wasn't a tzadekis, but she wasn't evil. So you could call her Basmas. There were two of the wives of Esau with the same name, Basmas. But one was called Basmas because it represents the worst. She was called Basmas because next to the other women that Esau married, she was actually quite decent. Okay? And her second name is Machos. And I want to talk to this. I'm going to finish the class with this. Machos is in the word mechila, to forgive, to wipe clean, to atone. And I want to start this little piece of the class with a story that I heard from Rabbi Beryl Lipskis Ogazunzain, who works downstairs in Achei Temimim. I worked with him for many, many years. And this is one of the many things he shared with me about the Rebbe's Fabrengen mission. Okay, so I'm digressing for a moment, and I'm closing with this. There was a Jew in Eretz Yisrael whose name was Shneur Zalman Rubishov. Shneur Zalman Rubishov was a Lubavitcher Chassid from home. He was named after the Alter Rebbe. At the age of Bar Mitzvah, he was registered in Achei Temimim. At the age 14, he got himself kicked out of Achei Temimim because they found him reading, quote, Biche, books. Shneur Zalman Rubishov later took the name Zalman Shazar because the father of the modern state of Israel, a wonderful Jew by the name of David Ben Gurion, had a policy that Israeli names are only allowed to have one syllable, so everyone had to reduce their names. So Rubishov became Shazar, Zalman Shazar. Rubishov. So Zalman Shazar was not Pekadis most of his life. He was one of the great Zionistic thinkers. He was very, very secular, but he had an undying Chassidish neshama. I mean, he has there's a wonderful book that was done by Shmuel Krauss called Nasi V'Chosid, where he writes how when the Zionists were being harassed by the Frumme, and the Frumme had the upper hand in Poland before the war, so when they were really, really plotting, when the Frumme were really being mean to them, he would sit down with his Freie Chavedim and he would sing the Alter Rebbe's Niggen. And they would say, Zalman, ma atashar. He said, Atem lo tavidu. I don't believe in God, but I'm a Chassidish Yid. This was Zalman Shazar. Zalman Shazar, at the end of his life, became frum. Shabbos kosher tefillin. Became a frum Jew. He met the Friedrich Rebbe in 1948 when Israel became a state. And I heard this from a Jew named Steinmetz, Halav Shalom, he told us that if Fabrengen, he heard it from Rabbi Jacobs in person. It's a true story. That when Israel when there was a discussion in the United Nations about what was called partition, to make a two-state solution then. This is Transjordan and Palestine and Israel. So they were afraid they didn't have enough votes. So Shazar came to the Friedrich Rebbe for a bracha. And the Friedrich Rebbe told them, you're going to have enough votes, Israel is going to become a state, but as soon as Israel is clear to state, I want you to come back here, I'm telling you you're going to win, and therefore I want from you a bakasha, request. So he went to the United Nations. It was not in New York City at that time. It was someplace upstate. I never forget the place. They once held the Olympics there, if you remember but I can't remember the name of the city. Anyway, there was enough votes. Why? Because the British came out against the state of Israel, right? The British, the most wonderful people in the world who don't hate anybody, of course. They're kind and refined and dignified. They speak with a wonderful English. They're such hateful people, but they do it cool and collected, so you're supposed to love them. But when the British came out against, who had to come out for? Stalin, because Stalin hated the Brits more than anything else. So the entire Eastern Bloc voted with Israel. There was enough votes, and the partition was declared. Israel became a state. Shazar came back to see the Rebbe, and the Friedrich Rebbe asked him for Kfar Chabad. The first from kibbutz in Israel was Kfar Chabad. As soon as Israel became a state, the Frierdiker Rebbe asked for it. So Shazar said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, why do you want to have a kfar of just Chassidish Yidden, just from people? So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, they're coming from Stalin, they're coming from Hitler, the double wally, they're very broken. They need a place in Eretz Yisrael, the Holy Land, where they could learn and daven and serve Hashem with peace, without any disruptions. So Shazar went into his regular Zionistic rant. We don't need Jews to come and Jews to sit and read books. We need Jews who are going to make the desert bloom, and they're going to build houses out of rock. They're going to work the land. Chalutzim, pioneers, the old Israeli motto. He got really upset. And L'Poel, he gave the Frierdiker Rebbe Kfar Chabad. Kfar Chabad is one of the best spots in all of Eretz Yisrael. It's right in the center of the country. And when he went on this rant about we don't need Jews who are going to sit and learn and daven, we need Jews who are going to build a country, the Frierdiker Rebbe said, quote, Der Mensch wird sich ändern. This man is going to change. And he changed. He came to the Frierdiker Rebbe a few times. He came to the Rebbe many, many times. And he loved the Rebbe. He mamish loved the Rebbe like a chassid. It was really weird. And at one point, so the story was the first president, Israel has a prime minister, right? That's the head of state. That's the head of the government. But there's a puppet position called the president. The president in Israel is like the queen in England. It's an honorary position, except if there's a tie in the Congress. So the president is like, he wears a nice suit, he goes to all the ribbon cuttings, but he doesn't have any real power. The first president of Israel was a man named Mr. Ben Tzvi, and when he died, so he was the president from the time Israel was founded a state until he died. I think he was the first president. Maybe the first was Chaim Weizmann. But when Ben Tzvi died, Ben Gurion called Shazar. They were very close friends. And he says, you have to be the president of Israel. Now, Shazar was involved in the government. He wanted to be involved in politics. He ran the Department of Education. He was a very powerful man in the early state. And Ben Gurion said, I want you to become president. And Shazar said, I'm not interested. I want to be, say, in politics. I want to make a difference in the country. And Ben Gurion, who was an apokaitis, on every level, apokaitis said, Zalman, you're the kind of man who can be seen walking in the street with a lulav. We need you to be president. In other words, Ben Gurion was as much of an apokaitis as he was. He still had a Yiddish neshama. He knew the president has to walk in the street with a lulav. The Rebbe pushed him. Shazar didn't want. And the Rebbe convinced him he became the president of Israel. And it created a huge conflict. Because as the president of Israel, he was the head of state. When he visited America, he wanted to come to the Rebbe. And the entire Israeli country and the press and everything, the president of a country is going to go visit a rabbi in his house. Let the rabbi come to him. Each time he came to the Rebbe, from that point on, it was a big tumult. And naturally, he came to the Rebbe each time. The Rebbe never went to him. And there's many beautiful stories about this, which I'm going to skip. But this is what I want to tell you. When he became the president of Israel, the Rebbe spoke a sikha. And like Berel Lipke was there, he told me how the Rebbe started. The Rebbe started the sikha with these words. I love to get myself into tight spots. I love to get myself into trouble. So the Rebbe says that it says in the Gemara, the same 3 people are forgiven for all of their sins. One of them is if you take a new position. Another one is isha, if you get married. And the third one is if you go through Gatus, I think. So there was a whole sikha that since Shazar became the president of Israel, that means all of his sins are erased. He's got a new clean slate. Don't ask. Satmar had conniptions. It was one of the things that the beginning of the war between Satmar and Lubavitch, this was one of the things that really drove them nuts. They came running to 770. How could you say an apokaitis? The Rebbe said, so they told the Rebbe, are you going to say anything about Ben Gurion? When he became the prime minister, to give balls of Avedis. And the Rebbe said, Vos hat mir, I don't mind if the Eibusha forgives him. The Rebbe had no problem with it. But the Rebbe spoke that sikha that when President Shazar became the president of Israel, so Rashi says, why was her name Machlas? Because she got married. Esau marries a girl, Machlas. He and she are both forgiven for all their avedas. Her name was actually Basmas. Her name was Machlas because she got married. Now I want you to understand what I want to impress. Esau was a Rasha. This girl Basmas wasn't a tzadekis. I mean, she wasn't evil like Yehudis and Basmas / Ada, but she was no tzadekis. But Esau was a Rasha. And the Torah tells us that even a big Rasha, when he gets married, Hashem forgives him for his avedas. And the logic, Rabbi side, the philosophy, the pshat is pashut. Number 1, getting married is a big mitzvah. It's a very big mitzvah. It's something when the Eibush that created the world, he didn't put this into the Torah. He put this into the nature of humanity, right? It's natural to human beings. This is one of the things, you study the biology. No, there are animals in this world that are monogamous. You know that? There are animals in this world who mate for life, particularly birds, and there are other animals. But even animals who are monogamous do not have relationships, meaning the male and the female bird that every year build a nest and lay eggs, and they feed their chicks until they fledge. As soon as the birds, the chicks, the young are fledged, they go away. They don't live as a couple. They're together just to raise their young, and then they part company. When the breeding season comes, they find their mates in the year before, they build a nest again and do it again. They don't have relationships. This is biology, this is science. The only animal, this is a terrible thing to say, that the Eibishter made, that we bond and stay together for life, not just for child rearing, is the human beings. The Eibishter made us to be married, a man and a woman together. It's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah which is built into the nature of human beings. That we're supposed to bond with a girl, with a woman, and spend our life together. And this is part of the reason why. You're fulfilling the basic nature the Eibishter made human beings. That separates. One of the things which undeniably separates people from animals is the idea of joining together and staying together for life. And I want to say one more thing just for fun. And that is, I ask myself this question all the time. In life, there are two things that are beyond question the most difficult things you'll ever do. Number one, be married. And number two, raise kids. And I vacillate back and forth, which is more difficult, being married or raising kids. I think the more difficult thing to do is to be married. Raising kids is a wonderful experience, trust me. When you're done, you're old and you're used up. And it's interesting. Raising kids is exhausting. It's the greatest thing in the world, having children. But it takes your life away. But you could make a good case that the hardest thing you'll ever do is get married and stay married. It's hard to be married. It's not easy. And the foundation of the success of marriage is your readiness to put aside your ego, to put aside your solitary nature, to put aside your aloneness, to join with another human being. The commitment, the readiness to be married, the decision that I'm going to put aside things that I want so that I can fulfill this idea of living with another person, is reason enough for the Eibishter to forgive us for all of our averos. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm pretty sure humans aren't the only species that have like actual family, like babies, like groups. Because like there are wolves, which also have like families, sort of packs type of things.
In wolf, I forgot what they're called, there's an alpha male and an alpha female. And then there are subordinates. Only the alphas are allowed to mate. But for cat, it's not a couple. It's an extended family. It's not a couple. There's not just one adult pair. There are many adults that live together. And all of those adults look after the children collectively. In other words, they don't allow others to breed because there's simply not enough food. And where there's more food, the subordinates also breed. And if I can't, you're making my point. The idea of monogamy, Mr. and Mrs., to the exclusion of everybody else, like they announced at the wrong time under the chuppah. You know, they announce to the exclusion of all others when they call up the Eidim. They should say to the exclusion of all others when the guy puts the ring on his wife's finger, and Ed Mukadesh asleep, to the exclusion of all others, is only by human beings. And again, I want to repeat, in most species of animal, the reason for joining together is only for having children. And this is unique to human beings. Anyway, point well taken. I'll get to Dav Maida. Thank you for listening.